recognize that what we do changes our mind more than what we think. And so when you're wanting to accomplish things, really think about doing something and not just thinking about it. And not just imagining you're a good person because you have good, happy thoughts. Go out and be kind to people. Go out and help your neighbor, help somebody that you can have a tangible effect on.
Welcome to Allow Yourself podcast. Today we have a guest that I'm very curious about and very intrigued would be is the world, because he has so much to share with us and to teach us, I think, that will be really very interesting to hear him talk. His name is Neale Martin, and he's the author of Habit, the 95% of behavior marketers ignore, and was founder of Sublime Behavior Marketing. His work begins with a single uncomfortable truth. Up to 95% of customer behavior is unconscious, and most marketing designed for the other 5%. For more than 30 years, Neale has helped organizations close the gap, applying insights and neuroscience and behavioral psychology to build the strategies that work with how customers actually behave, not how surveys suggest they do. He is the creator of the Martin Customer Behavior Model and the DIRT+M Behavior Change Framework, proprietary methodologies applied across consumers, goods, technology, healthcare, and financial services. His next book, An Integrated Behavioral Marketing, is forthcoming, and he is in Marietta, Georgia. So let's welcome Neale Martin. Hi, Neale.
Hi, thank you so much for the kind introduction.
I know you're an entrepreneur now and you have allowed yourselves a lot of things in your life. So, but when will you hear the words allow yourself, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, I think a large part, there's somebody came up with a book several years ago called Chapter Two. And they said the chapter one was the life you had to leave, and chapter two was the life you chose to lead. And so I think that really allowing yourself, to me, is just about giving yourself permission to do the things that drive you internally, as opposed to the things that control you externally.
Oh, and you're a master in that right now, as I read. So if 95% of the behaviors is unconscious, how can we bring them to an awareness?
Right. So this, I'm actually working with this with some churches right now in terms of like how to meaningfully change. And so the idea that we all have is that we're consciously making choices that we consciously decide. But 1994, Antonio Damasio published the book Descartes' Error. And so Descartes had famously said, "I think, therefore I am," and his whole framework was the separation of mind and body, and this belief that reason was superior and separate from the the machine that is the human body. And so beginning at that point was this revolution in how we understand how we actually think and how we actually make decisions and choose in the life that we choose to have. And not only is reason not separate from emotion, but reason doesn't work without emotion. And I think this is one of the most difficult things for people to really understand, that what they're thinking has already been pre-digested by their unconscious mind. You're aware of so little of what your body is actually perceiving. And when something sort of arises to your attention, it's only because it has sort of gone above a threshold. So you don't think about your clothing unless you're cold or hot. You don't think about the temperature of the air unless it's uncomfortable. It's when something becomes conscious that you focus on it. And then when you're focusing on that, you're not focusing on all the other things. So to think about how your shopping would be influenced by whether or not you were hungry. To think about, the fight you just got into with your spouse or your friend was happening because you didn't sleep well. And so we have these millions of sensory inputs that are going on every second, every moment, but we're only consciously aware of a tiny, tiny fraction of that. And so when we think about why we do what we do, it's important to think systemically, to think about, how we're trying to align what we want to do, what we intend to do, and what we actually do, and to understand the precursors of all of that are these emotionally interpreted um, evaluation of all the sensory input we have. And so it's those connections between your emotions, between your thoughts, between your feelings that I think is what it takes to really begin to kind of align those things and to become more purposeful and to understand, how you do what you intend to do as opposed to what you're reacting to.
Ah, okay. So it took me to the supermarket, right? When we go to the supermarket and we're hungry, so we come home with twice the amount of food that we were
Right.
supposed to buy, and and um, I usually have the habit of not deciding when my mind is hot, when I'm really excited and people are just telling me how good and how you need it and how much you need it and how you cannot do it without it. Um, I usually say no uh, before because I say I don't talk and I don't decide when my mind is hot. Is that correct? Is that to just let it cool and can see other perspectives than only what my emotion impulse is?
Yeah, so the way I kind of frame this out is the idea you sort of exist in one of three states. So one state is what I call pilot mode, when you're really consciously attending to things. You're comparing things, you're thinking about things. This happens when it's a novel situation. I haven't had to solve this problem before, or something's kind of out of whack. And then on the other end of that spectrum is habitual behavior, which I call autopilot behavior. And that's where it's just stimulus response. I know that this is the juice I buy every time, or this is the dinner, the pasta I pick each time. And then in between that is this heuristic, this kind of rule-based thing. And what you just described, and I call this co-pilot. And what you just described is a heuristic. When I'm in this situation, this is how I handle it. And so it's not like I'm just habitual. I automatically say no. It's I automatically kind of say I'm pausing. I'm not going to be talking anything because I'm like in a really excited state. And that's a really important thing to realize because there's a tremendous amount of the world is trying to get you to panic, is trying to emotionally manipulate you. And so you see this in a newspaper that talks about this alarming thing is going to sell more newspapers. The headline that's really scary is the one you click on. And you think about the entire industry of the internet and about how you're trying to get people to click on things, the whole concept of clickbait is I'm teasing you with something to make you curious so you'll do that thing. And so the idea that you've developed this heuristic is great. I mean, that's very, very smart that you have recognized that about yourself and you've developed a strategy for how do I handle that situation. And the people who don't have that strategy are just really highly reactive to whatever's going on around them.
Yeah, I just if you push me, I say the answer is no. If you push me, the answer is no. But because in my life I had very bad situations, a very good situation. So I got to a situation where euphoria and depression is almost at the same thing. I'm not in my center, so I cannot make any decision that it's my intentional decision and not something that I will regret if I'm in euphoria, very excited, very enthusiastic, or I'm very depressed, I'm sad, I don't feel like anything. So in those extremes for me are exactly the same way of feeling. No, that is like come to the center first and then you can see the whole picture, not just one fragment of the picture.
Yeah, it's something that, you think about how many, from a survival perspective, that really, really fast reflexes are critical. If you're an animal, if you're trying to escape being eaten by, a tiger or whatever, you have that kind of a, when you're driving, you this need for this
Mhm.
instantaneous, don't think about it kind of response. And that's the same brain that is the one that gets manipulated in these shopping situations, or in voting, or in donating. It's trying to convince you that it's the same kind of existential threat as in those real, physiological situations where it's important that you act really fast. And if you don't, then you might die. And so to get you to think that way about, your coffee, or about, a political election, but this guy is, I've never, it's like we only have one villain in the world and it's Hitler. There's lots of villains in the world. There's a lot of people that we could say, hey, don't be like that guy. But it's a simplistic, I'm trying to ratchet this thing up to 11 so I can get a reaction out of you. And again, it's very wise of you to recognize that when anyone's trying to pressure you, that your automatic response is no. I think that's a super healthy way to look at it, because it's always like, what about this thing are you trying to, and it's almost always that's how they make money. If they get me to do this thing, that's how they make money. And if I don't do this thing, then they don't make any money.
Yeah, that's that's the what they're not saying. Right? That's between the lines because really what they're saying is if you don't do this, you won't be successful. If you don't do that, you cannot move forward. So, what is one of the things that most people misunderstand in the decision making?
Well, I think it's that they one of the big things is understanding how reason and emotion work together. And you shouldn't try to separate those things out. You should really understand how to integrate them. We all have this idea. Again, Western civilization. You were taught that a reasoned decision is good, an emotional decision is bad. But again, what Damasio discovered, and what a lot of people have uncovered over the last 40, 50 years, is that emotion is telling you something is important. If you don't have an emotional reaction, your brain doesn't know how to prioritize things. Now, that emotion might be anxiety, that emotion might be happiness, it might be fear, it might be elation, it might be anxiety, right? But there's something about that situation that this very, very powerful instrument of your mind that's outside of conscious awareness is processing. And it doesn't have words, it doesn't speak in numbers. It can only speak in emotion. And so if you disregard that emotion, if somebody makes you feel uncomfortable, if somebody makes you feel uneasy, then it's there's a reason for that. And you should pay attention to that. Now, it might be he reminds you of somebody else and there really is nothing wrong with this person at all, but it's also might be that that person has done something that makes you feel like you can't trust them. I wrote a Substack article last week about AI's fight for your brain, and the idea that when we feel like it's false, we call this a simulacra, and the idea that it's like that thing but it's not, and I can't trust it. And the part we when we're making decisions is we need to say, well, okay, somebody might be really good at emotionally manipulating me. I need to check that out logically. I need to verify that. Oh yeah, that sounds great. This is a really good salesperson. That sounds great, but now is the time for my rational brain to go in there and go, okay, let's check this thing out and see if it actually is a good decision. But if you disregard the emotional part and you're just like, I'm going to look at the spreadsheet, then you're going to miss the fact, oh, this person was untrustworthy, and that's hugely important before you make a decision. Does that make sense?
They, yes, perfect. I'm just I was imagining all what you were saying, that it's like, okay, they tell you all the good things that the product has.
Right.
But okay, stop. What he's not telling me, right? What he's not telling me. What is the side effects of this? Or what are the problems? How many repairs you had to do in the last? Okay, what are the questions you're going to ask that they're not telling you? Um, is I deal with this all the time because I have people around that are very enthusiastic and excited, and they just believe everything they read. And I said, we'll see. And they really get mad when I said, we'll see. What are they not telling you? Because people usually tell the stories of success and how good you are and how much money I earn and I'm so perfect, right? But they don't tell you that they lost. They don't tell you when they lose a lot of money. They don't tell you when the business didn't go. They didn't tell you when they made a bad decision. Those things that people usually don't tell you in order for you to have a very positive image of themselves. So, um, I always read between the lines, okay? It's like body language, as you say, what that make me feel. Ah, yeah, you're telling me all this. What you're not telling me. So if I ask that uncomfortable questions, that it's the where we were playing before, is the when I take the frog out of the prince, right? Is what are you not telling me? Um, People don't like those kind of questions. So it's very important what you're saying, that when the emotion comes, don't just leave. If that's what I understood that you're saying, when your emotion comes, don't let only the emotion play it. Just pause and check the reason also.
Right.
Uh, mhm.
And I think that what you're saying too, because it's the issue that I'm like, imagine that you're growing up in this era, and every picture you see of your friends is run through a filter that makes them look fantastic. Right. And then all of a sudden, imagine that you're somewhat insecure about yourself and you've created this persona with these filters where you're like perfect. Well, now I don't want to meet you in real life because you're going to see that, I have freckles, or I have a mole, or I have, whatever. And it's this idea that and kind of the theme of your questions really are all about, how do you empower yourself to be authentic and to be real? And it's something that it's weird that our children are in many cases not learning how to read faces. You have like an entire section of your brain is designed to read the face. And this is where it's something that I keep coming back to this, and people, I think again, it's just counterintuitive. But like if my wife comes home and she's gotten a haircut, and if like instantaneously I smile, or hey, that looks great, right? If that's an instant versus how's my hair look, right? Because now it's a conscious thing, and I'm thinking of a response, and I'm going to tell her, and that's going to be processed consciously. That's nowhere near as impactful of when somebody sees you having this. I mean, I wore clothes yesterday, and I got like four compliments on them, which is very unusual, right? So I'm like, oh wow, I'll wear that again. But it's that instantaneous thing that is giving you this information. Well, if I'm a guy and I'm trying to learn how to talk to girls, right? And I'm texting, or I'm meeting somebody off of a dating app, and so I'm not learning how to read nuance. I'm not really getting that fast feedback mechanism that allows me to really learn. That I mean, again, the world that we're giving our kids is in many ways kind of dystopian because they're the most basic normal things about being a human being, we're denying them. And so, when you're trying to figure like how to empower how to empower this generation, it's like, you put down your phone and go out and talk to people, learn how to talk to people, learn how to meet people, learn how to read faces, learn how to get feedback. And that's how, it's hundreds and hundreds of iterations that are all being processed by this, amazing unconscious mind of ours. That I think it's one of the things that just it sort of surprises me still that it's like the first time in history I think the kids coming up are not going to be higher performing than the generation before them.
And not in a way that we know. Yes, I agree with you that we have like naturally we have like 30 seconds to scan a person from head to toe to make a whole story about that person where gender, where does that person lives, what does he do, is it a good person or person? We have the whole story in 30 seconds. So if you don't have that, how can you teach that?
Right. Well, and what's really scary is it's not 30 seconds, it's like 30 milliseconds. It's
Mm.
like you're reading a face so fast and you're making your decision so fast that and again this it's why it's like it's so in the US, one of our major sports is baseball. And I mean, I know it's throughout South America. I mean, it's huge in some areas and some areas not. But
Hmm.
but you get the baseball pitchers are now able to throw a baseball more than 100 miles per hour. And so by the time that ball leaves the pitcher's hand till the time it hits the catcher's mask is less than 2 seconds. And you're trying to figure out how to swing a baseball bat and hit that ball. And the miracle is batters figure it out. They figure it out. And it is so far removed from what the conscious brain could do. The conscious brain could never, ever, ever work that fast. And this idea that these things are happening, streaming instantaneously, evaluating these situations, and that it's seconds before the conscious brain is kind of aware of any of it. And that's the part that when you start talking about like how do we give this to kids when they are spending so much of their time with this in their hand and going and looking at this thing, and that's why TikTok is so addictive, is because it's the fast feedback mechanisms. It's not you're not taking time to get immersed in a story and then this story has a payoff, right? It's not like reading, a book. It's not like watching a movie. It's like we've got these kids now where they're expecting this feedback so fast that their brain doesn't know how to handle silence. It doesn't know how to handle a lack of stimulation. They think there's something wrong. It feels wrong to them.
Oh, so what would you tell a kid or today, because it's very different from our 17-year-old teenager, what would you tell them to allow themselves to do in order to live a better life?
Yeah, I think a large part of it is to really delay giving these kids any kind of electronic device at all. How many times you go out to a dinner and you see a 3-year-old, 4-year-old with an iPad in front of them. The parents are using that to distract them so they don't, so they can have a nice meal. And it's they just get used to that. They get used to this moving screen. They get used to this. And again, that you're one of the scariest things I've ever learned in my life is that 80% of what we learn ever in our life, we learn by the time we're 5. And so to think about the preciousness of that time and how we're giving it over to this thing that's not that's not training the brain to read faces, that's not training the brain on all of the millions of things. I mean, it's like, you grew up in a Spanish speaking culture, but you learned English. Americans don't learn other languages. We suck at it. But that's because we're huge, and there are so many languages, and there's people from all over the world in our country. There are so many languages spoken. I mean, Spanish obviously is yeah, we should all learn Spanish. But
But in the Spanish world, a lot of people speak English. So when you come
right.
here, you don't have the need either.
Right. I mean, because I go from there to Turkey, and from there to Jakarta, and then from there to Berlin, and from there to Paris. So I can't. I mean, everyone speaking English is almost, it's just like a good lingua franca of, we're all going to be on, we all have a common language. But if you don't learn a language, a second language by the time you're five, it's incredibly effortful. But before five, it's natural. Kids can pick up a second language at the same time. It's because that's how those neural circuitry between these specific regions of the brain that encode and decode speech and code and, encode and decode writing are happening. And once you do it, it's natural, it's automatic. And that's, so I just feel like that's part of it. And then for the older kids is to really put time limits on and force human interactions. Force kids that come together to. I mean, my church group the youth group went to did a mission trip last week, and they all voted to leave their phones at the church. So for 5 days, they were in buses together, and they came back galvanized. Just the relationships had been so amazing. We had one of our Georgia Tech, where I have my PhD. A couple of years ago, their basketball team was doing really well, and they all agreed to be completely off social media. They weren't going to read anything anybody was said. They weren't going to be texting people. They weren't going to be doing this stuff, and it really created this tremendous cohesion. And I think that that's just part of it, is to create these spaces where we agree we're not going to be on our devices. We agree we're going to be talking to each other. I mean, like the rules in our household is, no phones at the dining room table, at the kitchen table. If we're eating, we're not on the device. And even if you're eating by yourself, you don't have the device on, because, that's, I'm unconsciously eating while I'm consciously here. So I'm not attending to what I'm eating. I'm not, one of my favorite experiments. It was in the Habit book. Some colleagues of mine up in North Carolina at Duke had done this experiment. It was just brilliant, where they had people come to a movie theater, and they were there, to rate movie trailers, was what they were told. But the experiment was really quite different. So they gave people a bottle of water and popcorn, and they had them watch it. Well, the experimental condition was that some of the popcorn was fresh and some of the popcorn was stale. So it was like 7-day old popcorn. So really, easy to tell this is stale. But they determined whether or not people were habitual popcorn eaters in theaters or not. And the people who were not habitual, they would eat a little bit of the popcorn, and they would, and we asked them later, they say, yeah, it was stale. The people who were habitual ate as much popcorn as the people who got stale popcorn, as the people who got fresh popcorn. And when you ask them how the popcorn was, they said it was stale. Right? It was stale. They knew it was stale, but they ate as much as if it were fresh. So, you start thinking through this in so many different kinds of examples about, when you're not attending to something, the behavior kind of automatically goes on. So, how do you align your consciousness and your unconsciousness? And that's a large part of it, is to be fully conscious about what you're doing, so that your unconscious mind and your conscious mind are aligning with your behavior.
Wow. Uh, Conscious where you're doing, and then you have to do it and be aware of what you're doing and not be distracted by something else. Um, I can tell you that this week happened to me that I had to take my husband to the hospital, so I had to arrange and connect so many dots and coordinate things. that I was in autopilot. I was automatic. So I had to come back to the house to see if I locked the door. I have to uh, check again in my purse if I have my keys in my purse. Because everything was automatic doing because my mind was someplace else. So this is in an emergency case, okay? Let's say that we
Right.
just put it aside. But we are creating then in our society people that are all the time distracted by external events and not paying attention what I am doing, what I'm if I'm eating, if I'm walking, if I well, it's unconscious everything, so we don't pay attention to. If I don't pay attention to myself, how come I will pay attention to the other?
Right.
Eh,
I call this the tyranny of the urgent. And it's a marvelous example. It's a perfect example, actually. I don't remember if I put my keys in my car because I'm so distracted. And when it's like when you've lost something and you're looking at places you haven't been in weeks, you kind of go, no, look, the reason why you can't remember it is because you weren't thinking when you put it there. It's not like you were thinking bizarrely, like I'm gonna put my car keys on top of the refrigerator. It's something that it is a commonplace that you do it, but it wasn't. See, and this is that the counterintuitive reality that is the human being is that we think we were consciously aware. We think we consciously have that information. We don't. Memory is reconstructed. It's not like I'm building a hard drive. It's each time I recall something, I'm reconstructing it. This is like if you want to learn something, we teach people in a very incorrect way. So, we're going to give you, a book to read. Again, no emotional involvement. Here's just facts. We want you to remember these things. It's not how the brain works. And then we give you a test, and you do whatever you do on the test. You cram for it, you do okay. Well, within 3 or 4 days, you're going to forget 78% of that, maybe more. So the forgetting curve is really persistent. And if I want you to learn, all I have to do is get you to recall the information periodically. And if you're wrong, to kind of update, like, okay, no, okay, so then that's the answer. And then if you do that frequently enough, you'll remember it forever. And so it's understanding how your mind actually works. It's so important to be able to kind of solve these problems. But if you don't have an emotional tag on something, you're not going to remember it because your brain is saying that's not important. If it were important, I would have had an emotional tag on it. The part of your brain, all memory goes to this one part of your brain called the hippocampus. And your hippocampus is connected to this other part of your brain called the amygdala, which is processing strong emotion. Emotion and memory are not separate things, they're linked. And so that's the part when you go into like a fairly abstract kind of decision like buying insurance. Right. And the insurance person is trying to get you to think about, oh, how important your child is, or how important your house is, or how important this is. And oh, wouldn't it be horrible to lose it and everything. Right. But unless they really are good at that, you're kind of going to go, yeah, 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 I'll decide that later. I mean, sometimes we're forced to. You have to get insurance to drive a car. You have to get insurance to do whatever. But the idea should be that I should have a rational part of my brain should say, well, how much insurance should I have with this? What's the chances of this risk occurring? How much, this is the value of the thing we're talking about insuring. Well, what percentage of that value should go on my insurance? And it's amazing. Insurance agents will never tell you that number. There's not an actual number that you should have, right? There should be like something you calculate. But this is where trying to empower yourself, trying to enable yourself to accomplish whatever it is, it really depends on your ability to do this, to understand how your unconscious and your conscious brains are working together and how to align them. Because if you don't, this was I did a TED talk, and the title of my TED talk was Why TED Talks Don't Change Your Life. And the whole point was if you want to change your life, you have to rewire and restructure your unconscious mind because it's so much more powerful and so much faster than your conscious mind. And so your conscious mind might say, I want to eat better, I want to be healthier. But your unconscious mind is doing what it's always done. It's doing what you've trained it to do, and it does it super fast and very efficient.
So how you do it?
Well, you have to understand the process. It's not an event. It's not like my willpower. I'm going to change this thing and I'm not going to
Mhm.
do this thing. It's like, in the way, the metaphor I use is like imagine you're got have to go through a field of really tall grass. And you have no idea what's in that grass, right? There could be snakes, there could be spiders or bees or whatever scary animal is in your part of the world. In my part of the world, it would be coyotes. Um, and so so the brain is that's stressful. But now imagine that there's a small path, right? Somebody's cut through, you can see this indentation. Well, that's where you're going to go. You're going to go down that indentation. And then the next time you're at that field, you're going to go down that indentation, which is now a little bit bigger. And if you go down that enough times, you now have a path and maybe a road even. And it's like that's such an automatic thing to do. And that's how your brain does it. It automatically does. So now you're saying, well, that path is taking me to a place I don't want to go. All right, I have to cut a new path. And so that means you have to go through a process of cutting a new path, which is scary, which takes energy. You cut the new path, you come back. Well, the next time you come back, that other path is still much more automatic for you, right? So it's going to be effort for you to go down this path again. So you have to set yourself up so that you're actually in this situation doing the thing that's a little bit harder. Over time, though, that other path, if you haven't been going on it, will get overgrown and it won't be. I mean, it's always going to kind of be there. That indentation is always going to be a possibility for your brain to choose. My wife had stopped smoking and she hadn't smoked for years. And she was coming home from work one day and she was like reaching in her purse for cigarettes. And she said, had there been cigarettes in my bag, I would have smoked it. She has no idea what set her off, but that's the unconscious brain making connections. They're saying, this is what you should be doing. And so it's understanding and giving yourself grace. Oh, sometimes, yeah, I still fall back on the path. But if I really consistently reduce that and increase the number of times I'm going down this path. And how do I do that? Well, I really focus on the bad outcomes of that other path. And I kind of minimize, you know what? I know this is effortful, but it's not that hard to cut a new path. And once your brain does this, and it may be a month of doing that before you actually even go down the new path the first time of really focusing on the negatives of what that behavior is bringing to you and really kind of making sure that you believe that it's possible and then that it's doable, manageable for me to do this other thing. So it's more of a process and it's more of understanding that you're not going to be perfect, but that what success looks like is that the path that you want to be on becomes the path that you are on. And that when you align those two things, that takes time to get those things to become the same path.
And then you say it's a process, and the new generation wants things done immediately. So they even say, "Oh no, my man says to go there, so probably I don't need to go to another path unless they want to change." That's the main thing, at least that I teach. If you don't want to change and you don't want to do the effort, not even an elephant will move you where you are, because the mind, at least it happens to me, try to pull me back to the old path, and
Right.
and my habit is, hello, that's the old Beatriz, this is the new one, so that's the old path, I'm going this way. But I make it conscious that, yeah, I know that path is, but that's not me now, I'm going this way. So it's like talking to myself all the time. No, not this one, this one. No, it's has to be really, according to what you say, a very conscious decision and awareness to change the way you do things. Even with the phone, especially now with the screens that are so addictive, that is like something is missing in your hand.
Hmm.
Eh,
But the other part of it is you could, and this is something which, and I think with, the AI future, I think it's going to become more and more where we can use these tools to help us. You can set alarms. You can program. Like when I'm writing, when almost anything I'm doing when I'm using the AI that I'm using, I'm almost always saying, what am I missing? And the other part of this is to realize that in this process, the end of it isn't going to be you have to be effortful every day. The end of it is this new way of being is becomes the normal. This feels natural now. I used to take cream and sugar in my coffee. When I decided I didn't want to do that, it was probably 2 weeks of it just not tasting great. But then eventually that tastes normal. And if somebody gives me cream and sugar in my coffee, it tastes bad. Doesn't taste right. And that to me is always the understand that's your end state. That's your goal is to get this new thing to feel normal. And so often, like people, they're like, how many times does it take repetitions does it take to create a habit? Going back to when we began talking, it's a context. Your brain says, in this situation, I do this thing. If I change up that situation, if I make it a new thing, then I stop doing the old thing. It's if there's nothing there to cue the behavior, then that the old behavior can just kind of go away. And a lot of times that's what happens. Like when you move, behavior changes. You change jobs, behavior changes, and all of a sudden you find yourself not doing something that you just thought you were going to do for every day for the rest of your life without thinking about it. But if you don't set yourself up for success, you're really setting yourself up for failure. When you have a situation of, oh, I want to lose weight, um, and so you're trying not to eat as much, and then when you do eat, you eat something that's quick and easy, like a candy bar, whatever. I mean, the things that are quick and easy because they've been shown to sell the easiest. So maybe one of the first things is don't let yourself be proactively eat healthy food so you're not hungry and you're not setting yourself up for being hungry and weak at the same time. So you proactively eat healthy, and then when you eat something sweet or something that's not healthy for you, you're going to eat a lot less of it. And as you crowd that out, and that becomes because with most things that are like the stuff we eat in America, especially. Um, it's disgusting. If you just ate that without having been trained up on it with a little bit more sugar, a little bit more sugar, a little bit more sugar, a little bit more salt, a little bit more salt, you would never eat it. It's disgusting. When I get away from sugar and I eat something which is like normal sweetness, it's horrible, right? But it only feels okay because you've gotten used to that over time. And that's the same with so many things that we want to change is that, it's this incremental thing that occurred. Well, you can flip that equation around, put a little bit less sugar in each time, a little bit less salt in each time. And then and that becomes the new normal. That becomes what tastes right, and the other thing tastes wrong.
Um, in my book that is called Flip It Over, I like the chapter 11 that it's especially, that is the story we're telling ourselves. So is that is that a main thing really to flip things over, the story we're telling ourselves? Like in food, you said fast food is easy, is make us more sugar, more sugar. But if I say, okay, without eating sugar, I will feel better. I'll start stopping the sugar, so I will feel better. So if I give my mind that thought all the time, is that the an easier way to flip it? Is that what you're
I
saying?
think that's really an interesting question, and I think it has a lot of implications to it, because it really the other way of saying that is to reframe it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times when you reframe a situation, it's like when I listen to a lot of podcasts, and sometimes I'll listen to somebody, and and they're just really narcissistic. It's just all about them. And and I would say, well, just flip this equation around. Would you want to listen to somebody just talking about themselves all the time? And a lot of times, if you can get that question right, and you say something about you talk to yourself a lot. I think for a lot of people, that's a super healthy way to do it. It's like I like these little tidbits of wisdom, and like one of these I've seen in a few different places, but it's do something today the future you will thank you for.
No,
Um,
nice.
yeah, or give advice to yourself the way you would to your best friend. And but when you say flip it over, I mean, I think it's marvelous. I think it's a really neat idea to say, let me reframe this, let me rethink this from this completely different perspective, and what do I see? How do I see this now? Um, and and I because I do think that a lot of times people lack perspective. One of the things that I've known, and I was a counselor, and then I was going to get a doctorate in psychology, but I ended up with a doctorate in marketing. But it's all the same kind of stuff about how we are what we are, how humans operate, how we behave, and one of the things I feel like that is. I see it so much, and it links to such a level of unhappiness and depression that I see. But it's this. Do you have an attitude of gratitude or not? Do you feel grateful? And if you feel grateful, your whole perspective on life is different than if you feel resentful or if you feel like I'm not getting what I'm supposed to have. And if you, it doesn't matter what I give you. If you have that attitude, it's always that attitude of I want more. I'm not getting what I'm supposed to have. And yet the people who have an attitude of gratitude, they could live in the poorest situation in the world, and yet they're happy, or at least a lot happier. And I think that when we make this connection so often, that would probably be really helped with your chapter 11, with this idea of flip that upside down and look at it from a different perspective to get an insight about that and get out of that trap of this automatic reactions. It's the thing that I and the way I view the world, it's your mind, it works so fast, and that you're jumping to conclusions so quickly. If you don't disrupt that, you can't get out of that argument with your spouse, right? Because it's just this triggers this, and whatever that
Hmm.
resentment was, and that resentment might go back to when you were a child,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
so how you
With the
how you keep those
pencils in
dominoes.
kindergarten. Yeah, with your pencils in kindergarten, right? Yeah. By the way, that's what I did with the book. You read it backwards. It's to take
Nice.
the automatic part of that. You need to be aware of what you're doing, what way to turn the page. I wanted to ask you if 95% of our behavior is and the marketers ignore, what do we have to be aware in order to market correctly to that 5%?
Well, what the whole point of this is that I want companies to understand that they should be making products that customers can use automatically without thinking about it. They should make rebuying from you automatic. No, I shouldn't, I don't want to be selling to you every time. I don't want to have to run an ad. I don't have to send you a
Oh,
coupon to get
that's
you to
what
buy
I
my
say.
thing.
That's what I say with me all the time. I want people to buy. I don't want to sell. I want people
Right.
to buy. Yeah. I had a
And
company that I got to that point that people used to come and buy. Not I didn't have to convince to sell to, not a pitch, not a speech, no nothing. Just come and buy.
Yeah, and I think that so many times people don't understand that, again, I deal with it, from high technology companies. I was out talking to the biggest tech companies in the world a couple of weeks ago to the consumer products companies, that they they just assume that people are consciously making these decisions and constantly making deciding between trade-offs. I want to make it automatically. I want your brain takes 20% of the energy of your body. It only weighs 3 pounds, and it takes 20% of the energy of your body. And if you have to think consciously, it takes even more energy. So our brain is trying to reduce that energy load as much as it can. It's trying to reduce these things into automatic habitual behavior. There's whole neural circuitry in your brain. That's what it's trying to do. And so when you look at something that has a lot of information, like you were talking about, where people are trying to sell you something, and you kind of have to put the brakes on automatic response, which is which is healthy and smart. But it's also if I try to tell you a lot of information, your brain gets overwhelmed so fast. Right. And so if I can sell you on one thing and it links to an emotional thing that you want, and then there's a good logical defense of that emotional decision, boom, I'm done quick. And that's what I want. I want to be done. I want to what I say is everyone's looking for a shortcut to a good decision. And your brand should be a shortcut to a good decision.
That's beautiful. And we're in a stage of our lives that it comes to a new step or stage. What would you need to allow yourself for your next step in your life?
Yeah, I think it's really funny. It's to think about like all of the junk you have in your house that you haven't touched in years. What would your life be like if you decluttered that? And when you make a change in your life, think about decluttering. What do I not have to do anymore? I mean, like, not taking suits to the dry cleaners. It's like I'm looking at all the clothes I just don't need to wear anymore, and it's hard. I mean, I've got an old email. I closed down my company, and I've still got my Sublime email account up because it has this record of all of these thousands of engagements I was on, all these people that I've worked with over the years. It's kind of the record of my company, and this idea to say, I don't need that anymore, and it's freeing. And I think that that's one of the big things is for people to think about, how, it's like when you graduate from college or when you graduate from school or even when you just finish the year, we just finished another school year. I don't ever have to take that, I don't have to deal with that anymore. I don't have to deal with that teacher. I don't have to deal with that work. I don't have to deal with that, Wuthering Heights. I'm done. I never have to think about Wuthering Heights again. But I think that that's kind of where when we take these steps, we have an opportunity to get rid of those automatic connections that um, in a lot of cases, we're talking about the tyranny of the urgent. I also talk about the tyranny of the normal. We do what feels normal. And that a lot of times becomes a cage that we build for ourselves, and that, the lock is on the inside of that cage. But we still are stuck inside of it. And, when you have the opportunity to make these kind of big changes, you really get to open the door.
It's so beautiful, and I so agree with you. And this morning, I had that conversation with my husband to take a lot of things out because it's really cluttered. But I know how hard it is. Yeah, I have to do it. Yes, I have to do it because, as we say at the beginning, there is this emotional attachment. This reminds me this situation. This reminds me all the people that I work with. This remind me how successful I was. This remind me when I work in Minnesota in the cold weather. Whether Yeah, we're in Costa Rica. You don't need a jacket that you need to be zero, okay, temperature in order to wear it. You won't wear it. You haven't wear it for 10 years already. Oh, but in case I need it,
Right.
is that emotional part that it's really, yes, you have to be. It's a process, as you also said, that it's you have to be convinced and decided that this is the new me to start decluttering. That is the new me, that I don't want to have this. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with properties. I don't want to deal with employees. So it's
Right,
like,
but I do think the other part of that is to really understand the emotional connection that you have with that part of your life. And that might be, it might be your kids were a certain age, you might have had really great friends, you might just felt great about life. I mean, I find myself listening to music that I when I got remarried and the kind of that honeymoon period, all kind of stuff, I find myself listening to the music I was listening to then. As opposed to, like, for a lot of people, the music they were listening to in their teens and 20s. And I think that for people to let go of that is to maybe in some ways they're almost like they're faced with their own mortality. Like, oh, this is this is I'm going in this one direction. Um, and I think getting to acceptance is critical for that, to really accept each phase of life and the opportunities as it has.
Mhm.
And that should not in any way, shape be perceived as decline.
No,
It's
it's a legacy. It's more like a
yeah,
legacy. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
achieved this thing and now I get to do this next thing. And the other part of that is, and I think people are they don't understand the trade-offs they're making. They don't understand that all of that crap that I have that I don't use is taking up space. Well, if I didn't have to take up that much space, do I need this much house? Do I need to do this much work? Do I need, what happens if I really understand the trade-off that I'm making? Oh, I'm still belong to this club and I'm paying these monthly dues. I never go. I never do it. Right. Yeah. And like, why am I holding on to that? And it's something that, getting back to the idea that your mind is making these associations and these connections, and you don't need the physical thing for your mind to make those connections. You can still really think back to those parts of your life without having, the big
The
fur coat
the
in your
physical,
closet
yes, the
that takes up
physical
so
thing.
much
Mhm.
space.
Yeah,
Yes.
the physical. Oh, it has been so wonderful and interesting to talk to you, Neil. And I think we all, the audience, have learned a lot of how our mind works and how our unconscious mind drives our life, even if we don't know, if we don't make that aware. Is there any special advice you would like to give the audience before we close?
Well, I think I've been working with my church on developing this how to change program that we're doing, and it's one of the things I see a lot with people is this misperception about how to align your mind, and this is something that, you know, if you're like really trying to create a spiritual relationship that's going to help guide you and to really recognize that what we do changes our mind more than what we think. And so when you're wanting to accomplish things, really think about doing something and not just thinking about it. And not just imagining you're a good person because you have good, happy thoughts. Go out and be kind to people. Go out and help your neighbor. Help somebody that you can have a tangible effect on, as opposed to I'm going to give money for some distant cause. And in the action of that, you'll be changing your mind. Your brain will actually build different neural connections, and it will change who you are, and it will change how you view the world. So that's kind of my big thing is to really focus on changing the actual behavior instead of all of the other stuff around it.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. It has been such an honor and privilege to have you here. And to those that are listening, remember that allow yourself is not just one thing, it's a process. You have to think about it and be aware of it and allow yourself to rest, allow yourself to change, allow yourself to be really you. And thank you, Neil, for opening your heart, your knowledge, your wisdom, and to share with all of us. You can find Neil in his website, that is Neale Martin, NEALEMARTIN.com, and the same name at gmail.com if you want to write to him. It has been such a pleasure. Remember, he has two very nice late books. I think is The Habit, 95%, how it's called, 95%, the 95% of behavior marketers ignore. And I just found that in his website, The Catastrophe, the new novel that he wrote, that it's really intriguing me. So next time I will tell you about it. So thank you very much, Neil, and see you next time.
Thank you very much.